3 years ago, I spent my life savings on a rotten boat. I spent the first year at sea, getting a taste of freedom. And on the 1-year anniversary, I took the boat out for what was supposed to be a short haul out. But things escalated, and the more I poked at the boat, the more things fell apart. What started as a hairline crack in the stern eventually ended up with me taking the whole thing apart, discovering a lot more than I had bargained for. So there I was in the dead of winter, now with a big hole in the boat, a ruptured diesel tank that was leaking through the planking, and a blown up water system. It was almost time to start putting things back together again, but first I needed to take a few more things apart and learn the skills needed to put her back together again. With the stern now in pieces, I was far away from the initial 2-week haul out. And with a big hole in the boat, I'd basically made her worthless, unless I'd be able to get her back together again. It was a daunting prospect, my first woodworking project in over 15 years, being a complete stern rebuild of a nearly 80-year-old boat. I was questioning what I'd gotten myself into, but I was committed. I now had a job in the yard, and I was in the perfect place to get this done. When I wasn't filming or editing boat building, I was doing apprentice tasks like varnish and paint and caulking. I was getting exposed to all the things I needed to see and do to be able to tackle this project. It was clear a lot of the structural timbers needed to be replaced. The corners were the worst, where the wood had turned into mulch, but most of the wood was compromised. Where it wasn't completely rotten, it was turning black and soft, and the wood around the fasteners were turning into powder. And as if that wasn't bad enough, now that I had access to the lazarette and I could really look around, I noticed that the wood around the rudder post had melted away, which meant I had to replace that too. The presence of fuzzy wood and the fact that it bubbled under vinegar meant that this wasn't rot I was dealing with, but rather electrolysis. Stray current was creating lye in the wood, breaking it down, an issue I would have to tackle down the line. And then there was the frames on starboard side that were obviously far gone, and I was suspecting it was the same on port side. With an ever-growing list, I would have to figure out what to start with first, and make sure that I didn't take too much of the boat apart so it would lose shape or would be impossible to get it back together again. It felt like I had a monumental task in front of me. Time went by pretty fast, and I honestly didn't get much done during the coldest and wettest months of the winter. We had more snow than usual, something that Atja absolutely loved. But the rain and the storms were taking its toll. The rain was getting through the tarps that I'd covered the boat with. Every now and then I'd discover a new leak somewhere inside the boat. And one day I discovered a drip inside the pantry. I started poking at the roof, and suddenly everything ripped apart. And I discovered a hole on the outside of the roof in the same area. Another thing to add to the ever-growing list of issues. During the cold months, I was mostly focusing on making money and learning the trade. Saving up to be able to afford the lumber and the fasteners I needed to get the job done. I was getting more and more exposure to boat building, slowly building my confidence to start actually making some pieces to put back into the stern. Once the snow melted away and the weather got a bit better, it was time to make some moves. The first thing I needed to do was to make patterns out of the ring timber. That would allow me to save the dimensions so I could cut a new piece out of fresh wood. All I needed was a glue gun and a bit of door skin. Alright, now I'm at the stage where I can start taking patterns of all these pieces that are going to be removed and replaced. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in with this door skin here. I'm gonna cut out strips. We're gonna put them here. Then I'm gonna make smaller pieces that I'm gonna glue in. That will mark the top and the bottom of this as we go along. That will give me a pattern that I can put on a fresh piece of wood and cut out a new piece. Now that I had my pieces ready, it was time to record the shape of the timber. But the issue was that the timber was so far gone in places that there wasn't really any solid wood left to follow. So I had to do some interpretations. And later on, when I mill the pieces, I will have to make sure that everything fits like it should. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna glue these smaller pieces in like this, where the bottom here and top touches each side of the plank. The technique of using door skin, a type of veneer used to cover doors, as you can hear in the name, is a super easy way of recording shapes. All you need is a glue gun and you can record pretty much anything. Any angles in the wood can be picked up and transcribed onto the door skin and saved for when you do your cut. I would have never thought I'd be using a glue gun this much outside of kindergarten. At the ends of the timber, the shape was changing a bit as it was starting to curve upwards. As you can see, I glued a bunch of pieces together. It's not very pretty, but at least it will record the information that I need. With the pattern made for the bottom piece, it was time to start working on the sides. Alright, now next is this fashion piece here. The easy part was getting the main shape of the timber, but the hole changes shape as it goes from the bottom to the top. That meant that I had to go in with a sliding T-bevel and get all the angles at different points of the timber and transcribe that onto the door skin. Something I'll explain more further down the line. Okay, so now that I've taken these patterns, I'm gonna move on to the next step, and that is to pretty much disassemble the rudder here and try to drop it out. Where the rudder is attached, there is a hole. So I need to drop the rudder, get all the hardware out, and then pretty much make a new piece of keel that is gonna splice into where that problem area is. So yeah, I'm gonna see if I can get this rudder post disassembled. Alright, so it looks like I need to get in under here and remove this bottom plate here that's holding the rudder in place, so I can drop that out and then get in here and remove all the hardware. So there are two bolts here that needs to be removed, and then there are 4 bolts down here that needs to be removed, and another 2 further forward. But I'm gonna start with these. The bolt holes were filled with crud. Who knows when this rudder was removed the last time? It's probably been on here for years, if not decades. The prop looks in fairly good shape though, so maybe it's been replaced recently. I was surprised to realize that most of the hardware was solid bronze, but unfortunately it's been covered by layers of paint throughout the years. I figured maybe I could polish it back up and make it look beautiful again. It still felt a little bit weird taking things apart. It felt like a snowball out of control, bouncing down a mountain. When was it gonna stop? I was worried that maybe I would end up with the boat one day looking like a whale skeleton on a beach, just the ribs sticking out of the sand. I'm sure those of you who have restored a lot of things before find this process trivial. It's just about taking things apart. But I still had barely done any woodworking at this point. Sure, I'd watched the guys working in the yard, and I'd read some of the literature, but soon I was going to have to put my knowledge to the test. I haven't been new to a topic big like this in many years. The last time I took on something really extensive, it was learning how to become a traditional animator, something that took me many years to master. But this is a completely different medium. It's not ink on paper, but it's hands working with wood, making pieces fit perfectly to form something that is gonna float and keep us safe and secure. Even though it might feel like it, my life is never on the line if I make a bad animation. But if I build a bad boat, that's a completely different story. There we go. One rudder. Now I should be able to go back up into the lazaret here and remove the stuffing land, packing land. Anyways, the hardware. Some of the footage that I got during this time have unfortunately disappeared, so I didn't get the whole removal of the rudder post. But it was extremely difficult to get out. But with a bit of help and a lot of heat, I managed to get it moving. I also removed the triangular corner pieces connecting the stern post to the keel. And with all the wood out of the way, it was clear how damaged the keel actually was. Alright, so I think the time has come to start milling out the first new pieces of wood to go back into the stern. And I think I'm gonna start with frame number 3 here. It's pretty old and in pretty rough shape. So at the ends here we have quite a bit of deterioration. So I'm gonna take this, I have a couple slabs of wood that we can lay this out on and then make a pattern. Atja, you can help? I was starting easy with transom frames, just straight pieces of wood with a little bit of shape to them. All I needed to do was to mill a raw slab of wood into the right dimensions. It shouldn't be too hard. For the transom frames I was using a wood called black locust, or Rubinia pseudoacacia, or false acacia. Here we have a couple slabs of black locust. I'll be able to get a frame out of this section here, so I'm just gonna slice this off. Then we'll take it to the shop and start getting some shape into this. Black locust isn't an uncommon wood to find growing here in BC. It's a wood mostly seen used for making fence posts, and the saying goes that a black locust fence post will outlast the hole it's put in. It has incredible rot resistant properties. It steams well and it's incredibly strong. Pretty much the perfect wood to put in a boat. Right, let's see if it fits. First piece of wood going in. Let's see if it fits. That is looking pretty good to me, and I have to say the satisfaction of getting this first piece of fresh wood into this boat is just lovely. Now on to the next. This one in a bit of worse shape than the last. So the first piece of wood was finally in the boat, but 6 months had already passed in the boatyard, and it was slowly becoming apparent that this was going to be my home for the foreseeable future. The boatyard was a far cry from the life I'd envisioned when I bought the boat. Towering mountains had been replaced by old, decrepit fishing boats. Creeks with water so clean you could drink out of them had been replaced with puddles and oil slicks. But I was enjoying the work. I'd always been creative, drawing and painting from a young age. But in boat building I'd found something that, if done right, could long outlast me. You never own a wooden boat. All you are is her caretaker. I feel a responsibility to her to make sure that she lives on, so someone else can enjoy her in the future. I don't know if it was so much as me finding her as her finding me. I think we both needed each other. So when people ask me, wouldn't it just be easier to crush her and buy a new boat? I always think to myself that that was never the point, to avoid hardships and difficulties, to shield myself from the texture of life, but rather that it's in these struggles where you tend to find something real. Thank you so much for watching this episode, and a extra big thank you to all of you that have become Patreons. If you're not already a Patreon and you want early access to episodes, bonus episodes, merch, and a whole lot of other perks, then check out the Patreon. You can either scan the QR code that is up in the left corner right now, or you can click the link in the description. There you can also find a couple of other ways to support this show. Liking, commenting, and subscribing is always greatly appreciated, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.